We're glad you could join us on this special conversation on the Budget Summit. Remember, this is the second leg of the conversation we had last week at the Suriname, where we unpacked issues around the budget estimates for 2025-26 as well as Finance Bill 2025. Incidentally, this being the May 27th was the last day for the public to submit their comments to the Clerk of the National Assembly on Finance Bill 2025 proposals. And I'm privileged to have with me on set an eminent panel, starting with the extreme left on my side. Here, I have the Chief Executive Officer of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, that is Mr. Tobias Alando. Karibu sana.
Thanks, Julian.
Next to him, I have Madam Edna Gitashu, FCPA Edna Gitashu, who is the co-convener Public Finance Committee at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants, ISPAC. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Julian.
And I also have with me Fred Kimotho, Associate Director at Deloitte. Karibu sana.
Thank you, Julius.
And finally, Rashid Kalani, CEO of Aga Khan University Hospital. Glad you could join us, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are all welcome to this conversation. You were part of this conversation last week where we began unpacking issues around the budget. And let me just kick off with something which emerged from the Director General of Budget and Fiscal Affairs at the National Treasury last week. If we could have that clip and listen to what he said about the proposal to clean up the VAT Act as proposed in the Finance Bill, and that will kick off our conversation.
Removal of VAT. I think here, again, we will take different views, and let's agree. On VAT, zero rate, and you can talk to KRA, we have a problem. If the total VAT refunds submitted to KRA, following an assessment, 30% of those claims are declared invalid. So it means there is abuse of a process. And if the industry does not work with government to streamline that, would rather just get rid of zero rating. There is a lot of abuse. Number two, I always ask myself, if you are having challenges getting your refunds, why do you push for more? I mean, rational theory will tell you that if you are not getting what you already is due, why would you want, you would rather have it known that it is not zero rated, it is exempt maybe, and you move on. We strongly believe there is the VAT refund, and we hear you, and we would like to support businesses. But by the way, if it were for me, even the benefits are not transferred to the intended beneficiaries. Even this bread and maize, if it were left to me, I would rather remove, bring down the VAT, and everybody pays. Why would you, I believe you can afford bread. Why are we?
I struggle, DG, I struggle.
But it's a healthy debate. It's a healthy debate. Let's come with numbers. Let's sit down and look at what should we support.
That was the Director General of the Budget and Fiscal Affairs speaking at the inaugural Budget Summit convened by the Nation Media Group, taking place last week on the 20th of May. That is DG Albert Mwenda. Good friend, I know he's watching this conversation as we speak. Tobias Alando, yes. Is the VAT regime in this country broken? That comment was essentially directed at the manufacturers.
Ideally, we must admit that there is a problem with the VAT regime, and we need to address what I call the administrative challenges. Because moving products from exempt or zero rate to exempt or exempt to zero rate is not really solving the solution. We have a case particularly where I have produced my products, I have paid VAT on my inputs. I need to claim this VAT when I'm selling my product. The question is, how am I going to claim those inputs? If you're telling me that we move to exempt and say, then now I'll not be able to claim the inputs, then this cost of inputs in terms of VAT will be transferred to the final product, to the final consumer who will buy this product, rendering it very uncompetitive. Remember, we are competing with our counterparts all over the region. But if we are we are making a decision to move zero rate to exempt, probably because we do not have enough funds to pay the refunds. What about those refunds that were assessed and were proved that are legible?
Yeah.
Why can't they be sorted out?
Yeah.
If that is a problem we're having. But I think the major thing we're having in this country is the administrative challenges under the VAT regime, which we need to bite the bullet and sort it out.
Edna, Tobias tells us we need to bite the bullet, sort it out. Finance Bill 25 proposes a very radical cleanup of the second schedule on zero rating. Is that the point of biting the bullet and cleaning it up?
Yeah, so Julian, let me start by saying one of the challenges that we have had, there is no single finance bill or finance act that has not had rationalization of expenditure from a VAT perspective. So we are moving goods and services from the zero-rated category to the exempt category and eventually to the standard rate category. Yes. In my view, I think what we need to do is to come up with a policy, a fiscal incentives policy that is going to spell out these are the goods and services that are zero-rated. And this is the reason why they are zero-rated, and they'll be zero-rated for this particular period of time. Yeah. When it comes to exempt goods, again, strategically, we need to identify what are these sectors maybe we need to protect, or who are these consumers that we need to protect. And we have that in the fiscal incentives plan. And every so often, we need to evaluate this plan, because what we are missing out on is predictability. As a consumer or as a taxpayer, they're also struggling with compliance. And that's one of the challenges of VAT, because this movement happens every now and then. So I think we need to take a few steps back. Let's go back to a fiscal incentives regime. And by the way, the national tax policy had talked about this, but we're yet to see the fiscal incentive regime. And
Edna, to stay with you on that point, is that when the national tax policy and the MTRS, the medium-term revenue strategy, came out, and the indication that was that zero rating should be a preserve of exports only, there was a bit of sentiment right around the market that that will exclude so many products which currently enjoy the preferential rate. Don't you see a contradiction there?
I don't think there's a contradiction, and I agree with you. Actually, the national tax policy does indicate that zero rating of VAT should only be the preserve of exports. Yeah. But what we are saying is, let us agree. What are these goods or services that need to be zero rated? When we zero rate, we're actually trying to protect certain sectors of the economy. Yeah. So why are we protecting them? And for how long are we going to protect them? All this can only be spelled out in a fiscal incentives framework.
I see. Yeah. Fred Kimoto, the DG asked that, isn't it ironical that these people who keep complaining they're not getting refunds keep on taking more products under the zero rating schedule? What do you take? What's your take on that?
No, I like that actually, and it actually resonates with some conversation we had earlier today when we were presenting the submissions to the Finance Committee. One of the taxpayers had the view, or rather they did mention that they have a refund of around 1.3 billion. And the conversation from the panel was, why don't we move these things to exempt so then we don't have the problem of following up on the refund? And I think that's why we need probably to get it right as Edna has put it. We need to have a very good policy framework that spells out that for this type of a good is supposed to be exempt, this one is supposed to be zero rated. And then we are very clear in terms of the framework that we look at going into the future. It is worrying to hear that 30% of what is applied for refund is actually disallowed by the Revenue Authority. Yeah. So when you look at the VAT Act, for example, the reasons that could make a refund to be disallowed, and looking also at the technological advancement, there are very few reasons. So we need to interrogate then the reason why 30% is being disallowed. Are there more problems that are inherent with the whole VAT regime that needs to be sorted out in the long run? But the conversion of the ad hoc moving of goods from exempt to zero rated, from exempt to taxable, we need to have a bit of stability there, Julians.
I see. Rashid, as we talk about the VAT Act, one of the proposals in Finance Bill, and I want to really sort of get it right, is deletion of paragraph 63 of the first schedule, which provides for exemption of taxable goods for the direct and exclusive use in the construction and equipping of specialized hospitals. Mm-hmm. So we are moving them from exempt status to standard rated status, implying that 16% will be applicable here. What would this mean for Kenyans? Because for many of us, we read this in theory, but with the experience of specialized hospitals, what would that look like for us?
My reading of this is that the cost of healthcare will go up. If you look at the Kenyan healthcare, pharmacy products, medical surgical devices, lab reagents, 70% or more is imported. And if then it's taxable, like Tobias said, then it will be passed on to the consumers. So I think the cost of healthcare will increase. And when we are trying to solve the problem of healthcare financing in this country, I think this will add another challenge to the mix.
I see.
Yeah.
So there will be a cost implication here for the ordinary citizen. Tobias, the argument has been leveled by the National Treasury that we seem to all be in consensus that we have a tax expenditures problem as an economy in terms of the revenue foregone through this sort of incentives and exemptions given. Don't we agree that Finance Bill 25 is the time for this radical cleanup?
I think we're all in agreement that this is the time that we make a lot of difference in our finance bill. But a lot of conversation has always been on how much we tax rather than how much we spend. So the government needs to be very clear and put in proposals that we can agree with as citizens, that we are reducing our expenditure as a country. Because there's a lot of wastage in government. And through those wastages, you want to cover it by taxing more. If you look at the manufacturing sector alone, the only thing that will make the manufacturing sector contribution to the GDP grow, we have dropped from 7.5 to 7.3. The only thing that will make us grow is to incentivize exports. We encourage a lot of exports in this country to other countries. We've signed a lot of very good agreements to allow us to export to the European market. We have the AFCFTA with us. We have the ESC market that we've not totally exhausted. So the government needs to make a critical decision this time around to incentivize particularly exports. Yeah. This will spur a lot of investment in the manufacturing sector and grow the manufacturing sector and generate more revenue. Yes.
Tobias, I take it, given what you've just said, you're not in line with the Finance Bill proposal to clean up the exemptions for special economic zones. Edna, we saw the tax laws amendment try to clean up the first schedule of the VAT Act. Now we're seeing Finance Bill coming in aggressively on the second schedule. Don't you think it's a logical build-up? As the government has argued, we are clearly pointing you out that we are making a series of steps around the tax expenditures.
Yeah, so Julian, and we can predict the next finance bill is going to be moving from, from exempt to attracting VAT at 16%. But what I'm saying, let me just reiterate that point, Julian.
Yeah.
You know, one of the benefits of having a fiscal incentives policy is that you'll do a cost-benefit analysis. I like what Rashid said. So if, for instance, we're talking about hospitals and healthcare, the cost-benefit analysis is going to tell you this is a foregone revenue by the government, but this is the benefit when it comes to maintaining a healthy society. Yeah. So that's why I think it is very important, even as we are moving towards taxing this at 16%, let's understand why are we doing this. Yeah. And by the way, my view, it might not be a very famous view, tax expenditure in some instances is not very bad, because we also need to stimulate economic development or economic growth. So there are some sectors that need to be shielded so that they can stimulate more economic activity. With more economic activity, you end up with higher tax collections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we need to be very judicious on our cost-benefit analysis here. Fred Kimoth, allow me to switch gears here. One of the most contested provisions in Finance Bill 25 is the issue of audits and KRA being able to make a move even as an appeal is being lodged. What would this mean in a practical sense for taxpayers?
Thanks, Julian. I believe you're making reference to the proposal of the Finance Bill on Section 42, subsection 14E, yeah. The one that is seeking to delete, you know, the point on the commissioner being able to issue an agency notice after a decision has been made at the tribunal. So what that essentially means is that tomorrow, if the revenue authority wins against you, they then can correct the tax that is supposed to be payable immediately, even before you exhaust your rights of appeal. Because remember, after a decision is issued at the TAT, you have the right of appeal at the High Court. You're given 30 days to file a notice of appeal, and then 30 days to file your substantive papers, so that then you can argue your case.
Yeah.
So it's actually what is popularly known as pay-to-pray.
Correct.
And you might have seen it across the region. I think there are some countries that do have it. I think Uganda has it, Tanzania has it, and so is Ethiopia. But if you scrutinize the benefits of that particular provision, you'll actually notice that it has more disadvantages than the benefits, because it actually denies the taxpayers access to justice. Because you can imagine a scenario where you have an assessment of 1 billion and you know for sure that if you lose the case at the TAT, you've got to pay that 1 billion before even you appeal. So taxpayers are definitely then going to shy away even from appealing for some of these disputes. So I think it is one of those provisions that we need to really think about. It has been, I think the government has tried to bring it. This is probably the fourth attempt.
Fourth time.
This is probably the fourth attempt. We hope the reasons that made those other attempts to fail will make this attempt also to not to go through, because it's not a very good move. For the proponents of that provision, they argue on two things. I think one of them is some people argue that appeals are done as a delay tactic.
Yeah.
Taxpayers don't want to pay tax immediately, so they go to court. That is one of the reasons that have been given by the proponents of that proposal. The other one is, the issue of you have gone through the court process, you have assets as a company, but by the time the revenue authority probably is winning the case at the Court of Appeal, the assets have already been disposed. Probably even the company has already been liquidated. So you're coming back, and there is nothing to recoup from. But I believe for Kenya, we are in a different circumstance. For example, if you look at the issue of delaying tactic, if you look at the statistics, and we were discussing it with Edna earlier on, the cases coming out of the courts, especially the TAT, is almost 50-50.
Yeah.
So it is true that the taxpayers and the revenue authority have almost equal chance. So if it was the other way around, like 90%, 10%, maybe 90% for taxpayers, then you would probably say there is one side that is not, that is going to the court just for the sake of going. So I don't believe that there's a very strong reason. But then on the second bit, on people disposing security, maybe someone who thinks this way should give us the statistics in terms of who did this, and I'm almost sure that it is less than 1%. So that is almost then tantamount to killing a mosquito using a hammer. So we should then, try to stay with the laws that we currently have, and I think they are good for us, and they have worked for us as a country, as far as dispute resolutions are concerned.
But before I come to Rashid, let me just come back to Edna on this point, because we have seen a trend in the region. Uganda now has pay-to-play at 30%. You saw the attempt via Finance Bill 24, which was rescinded. And the argument is being leveled here that maybe there's a case for taxpayers to show, as the government likes to call, their skin in the game when they go with these petitions.
So, Julius, I don't agree with that. And you're right. So Finance Bill 2022 introduced the provision. At that point in time, the bill was proposing that taxpayers had to deposit 50% of the tax in dispute if they lose at the Tax Appeals Tribunal. 2023, we reduced the percentage to 20%.
Yeah.
So now we are going for 100%, which is too much. And as my colleague Fred has said, a taxpayer has an equal chance of winning this dispute at the next level. And think about it. So the government or the Revenue Authority has taken this money through an agency notice. Assume the taxpayer wins. Yeah. It is so complicated to get refunds. So how are we going to get this refund?
Yeah.
And making matters worse, think about the 1 billion that Fred has talked about as an assessment. Businesses would have to go and borrow. So it means for them to finance their working capital, they are actually relying on borrowed funds, and their interest costs are going up. At the point of refund, there is no interest that is payable to them. In my view, the penalty regime is adequate. Because remember, at the point where a taxpayer eventually loses this case, KRA is not just going to collect the principal amount, they'll collect principal plus penalty and interest. And the interest is going to compensate them for time value for money. So there's no loss there, in my view.
Okay. Let me hold that point there. We shall come back to that conversation and cross over to Rashid. Rashid, at the summit, we had a very interesting conversation around the proposed allocation to the healthcare sector in 25-26, 134 billion. And you put this nicely in context for us around as a proportion of the budget. Please speak to that issue.
So Kenya allocates around 3% of its budget to healthcare, both public and private. If you look at the Abuja Declaration, it mentioned 15%. So we are far from it. The question is not about 3 or 15. The question is, where do we want to be as a country? I have mentioned this many a times, that tens and billions of dollars are leaving this continent to go to India, Dubai, Turkey, and other parts of the world to get good quality healthcare.
Yeah.
If our agenda and if our objective is to arrest that, that means that we have to spend more money. We have to spend more money on equipment, we have to spend more money on hospitals, and more importantly, we have to spend more money on the specialist doctors. Because people are going to these countries to get specialized care, because those specialized care is not available in the countries where we operate, or it is not available of high quality, or it's not available consistently. So if we want to arrest the tens and billions of dollars, that means we have to invest in our healthcare more. And it has many benefits. One benefit is a healthy population. Healthy population means more economically driven population. So that's one benefit. The second benefit is that these hospitals and healthcare providers will provide employment opportunities. So the hospital that I manage, we have 3,500 people. Imagine if you have 10 more Aga Khan hospitals, yeah. Direct employment of 35,000 and indirect employment of 7 times more. That's number two. The third benefit is foreign exchange, right? We are in a dire needs of foreign exchange as a country. If you look at our trade deficit as a country, I think our exports are $7 to $8 billion a year, and our imports are $18 to $20 billion a year. So there is a trade deficit of $10 to $12 billion that needs to be filled. I think to generate that additional $10 billion of export is going to be an uphill task. Yeah. I think we can do that very easily, very safely by healthcare. So I've taken a longer route to answer your question, yeah. But the question is, where do we want to be? If you're content with this 3% and the status of healthcare, then it's fine, 3%. But if you want to make a difference, if you want a healthier population, if you want to arrest the diseases of non-communicable diseases, if you want to bring other African populations rather than going to other countries but to Africa, I think then we have to invest more.
I see. Tobias, a similar question to you is that if you look at the latest National Bureau of Statistics Economic Survey, the proportion of the manufacturing sector as a proportion of GDP has fallen for, I think, 3 consecutive years now. Correct. Yet we were targeting about 15% of GDP. Correct. Where does this leave us? Where does this put us in the context of the next financial year?
So what we have to agree with is that Kenya has a huge potential. We had an ambition to grow it by 20%, our contribution to the GDP by 2030, and create an additional 1 million jobs and generate 1 trillion in terms of revenue. Yeah. So just taking that simple example that Rashid has mentioned about creating 10 more Aga Khan hospitals in this country, what will that have in terms of impact on the manufacturing sector is that there will be demand for medicine, and that medicine can be manufactured locally. So an investment or a policy change on one sector generally will have another positive change on another sector. So manufacturing sector has a huge potential. It's just the challenge we've had in terms of unpredictability of policies and some policies that were brought in that have had negative impact. I'll give you one simple example of the policy. Export Investment Promotion Levy that was introduced, 17.5%. Yeah. Through the Export Investment Promotion Levy that was introduced, if you look at the economic survey of 2025, 2 sectors dropped. Yeah. That is the mining sector and the construction sector. They dropped because the costs of inputs became very expensive because of that levy. So we presented the scenario to government and said because of one simple decision, it has a negative impact on the sector. And we are glad that the Minister for industry had a session with the sector and said, what can we do differently? Our proposal is to remove the export investment promotion levy entirely, if not possible,
not the 10%.
No, not 10%, not 10%. But the justification they brought is that there's an investment has been done. So to protect the investment, there's a proposal to have it at 5%, which is much better. But our argument has been, we did not have to go through this so that statistics would answer the question we would have answered then.
At the very start.
They're at the very start of the whole scenario. So there's a lot of decision that we make in this country that has negative impact. If we were sober enough to review those decisions and make critical changes, then definitely our growth as a manufacturing sector would continue to grow. Now, another impact because of the policies is that we've had a lot of investment going to our neighboring country. And if you look at the surveys, Kenya manufacturing sector grew by 2.8%, but the Tanzanian manufacturing sector grew by 8.3%. Yeah. Reason? Just one or two policy decisions that we made. So it's a point of reflection, and I believe that if we sit together and make the necessary changes, then Kenya has a huge potential to grow the manufacturing sector and even surpass the other continents.
I see. Let me come back to Fred and Edna. On the point of pay-to-play, at the just concluded annual seminar by ISPAC, there was the mention that the government, to its own estimation, about 600 billion of potential tax revenue is locked up in cases at the courts, at the tribunal, etc. Isn't that a case for pay-to-play?
I don't think so, because you may want to ask yourself, what is 6 billion? You said 600 billion? 600 billion in the proportion of the tax revenues that the government. That's correct. But as we put it earlier, we have to ask ourselves, why do we need to have a pay-to-play principle as a country? If you look at the tax dispute resolution framework for Kenya, it's actually one of those very, very elaborate, and I'm sure Edna would agree with me. So it is very clear that the Revenue Authority will come do the audit. They'll give you preliminary findings. So you have a lot of opportunities for you then to argue your case even before you get to the TAT or to the courts. So the question then is to ask ourselves the quality of those cases that we do have. Yeah. What is the common theme? And I think at some point we did analyze, and we are seeing a lot of things to do with the documentation. The Revenue Authority saying that you don't have ABCD documentation. So it's maybe a case of the other side also trying to be a bit flexible, and the taxpayers also trying to be a bit flexible in terms of what can be paid. But I do believe, as we said earlier, since we have 50% win, it means that all those cases do actually have merit. But the other important thing to note is that I think even as far as dispute, judgments the judgments being made, the speed at which the judgments are made is concerned. I think we also need to address that, so that then we don't have cases piling so much in the courts, for a long period of time. You would rather, because you could have the 600 billion, and in actual sense, it's actually not money that is correctable in the first place. Okay. We have had disputes, by the way, that and I'm sure maybe Tobias, some of your members have probably seen them. In big numbers, you have 20 billion as an assessment. Yeah. When you go into the cracks of the matter, the amount payable is actually less than 100 million. You'll be surprised. So there is more to it than just a number of 600 billion in the courts. That's what I would put it.
Edna, Fred began by asking, in the grand scheme of things, what is 600 billion? That is 4 months of tax revenue collection in this country, because the average collection is about 150 billion a month. Is there a case there?
I don't think there is a case, Gillians. Maybe we can look at it differently and say, let's look at the dispute resolution process. Where is there a backlog? Because as Fred has said, you could have a very huge assessment, but at the end of the day, you pay nothing. Yeah? Because once you go to dispute resolution, the Tax Appeals Tribunal may agree with you entirely. So there's no tax to be paid. So I think let's focus on the dispute resolution process. Let's focus on strengthening the Tax Appeals Tribunal, and they're doing a fantastic job so far. They have been able to release their cases very quickly. Let's also focus at the court level. Do we have, maybe there's a case for having specialized tax courts to just listen to tax cases and fast-track dispute resolution. When you start talking about pay-to-play, you're condemning all these taxpayers and saying that they are guilty.
Upfront.
Upfront.
Well, interesting perspective there. Let me come to Rashid. One of the proposals which we have seen from the World Bank today, and this is a build-up to a point you made last week, is that the government should consider exempting low-income earners from SHIF contributions. Speak to us about financing UHC, SHIF coming into it, and what you see as the optimal pathway.
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think the health financing in this country has never been optimum. I think we have always struggled. NHIF, I think if you contribute, if you look at what people were doing in NHIF, during NHIF regime, people were not paying the premiums that they were required to pay. If you were to pay 500 shillings, then you pay 500 shillings. What was happening was that if you require a surgery, you pay 500 shillings for 3-4 months, get the surgery, and then stop paying. Yeah. Right? I think that's abuse. Yeah. I think that's the abuse by the population. What SHA and SHIF is trying to do is trying to fix the financing model, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I think everyone should pay, because everyone can be healthy or everyone can get sick. So everyone should contribute, because this is a national agenda, right? And I think this has been said many and many times, that 3 million employed sector has borne the burden for longest time, right? And it's easy to cut taxes from the paycheck. So I think exempting anyone is probably not the right way. If government is thinking of subsidizing is another way, that's a different conversation altogether. But everyone should pay, because health is a national agenda. Yeah. But the SHIF problems are, I think it's a teething problems. This is my hope and prayer. It has only been 6-7 months. The SHA and SHIF, they need to fix the system issues. I think we have seen there is a real intent on fixing those issues. I think the financing of 2.75%, I think it's the step in the right direction. We hope that the providers like ours can be paid on time. The system issues are not there. And also people who are not in employed sector, and they also contribute their share. Yeah. Not only when they require a surgery or when they get sick or when their family members get sick. Because now everyone has to play a role. Yeah. If the government has to play a role, the employed sector has to play a role, so does the unemployed sector has to play a role as well.
Thank you for that, Rashid. Tobias, the cost of power is something you spoke quite passionately about.
Correct.
Speak to us about it, then Edna will speak to it within the context of Finance Bill 24, within the energy sector perspective.
Yes. So we did our analysis, and if you look at the manufacturing sector, the cost of power in this country is about 70% more expensive. 70% more expensive compared to our counterparts in Uganda, Tanzania, and even as far as South Africa. That shows you that our competitiveness is largely eaten by the cost of power. We are lucky enough that we have reliable power, but that may not be sustainable in long term. We need to have a lot of investment in terms of the power stations and PPPs brought back on board, because we did the analysis also in terms of our consumption, hydro and geothermal. Geothermal, currently we are at 94%. We are only remaining with about 6% mark for us to exhaust the geothermal. And if the rain stops, not only in the region, but in Africa, then our reliance on hydro will definitely go away. So the cost of power is critical. We need to have a lot of investment now done again to ensure the reliability of the power in this country. And this issue of, a lot of investment has come in terms of now we are pushing sustainability, solar and all that, but that may not be enough. We need to really think through of investing on the power stations right now. There is one in Miwani, I think, or covering that part of the country. And there's another 2 stations that really need to be worked on. If we don't do that, and with a 6% margin remaining on geothermal, then we are likely going to have rationing coming, and rationing is not good for us. If the government would address the cost of power, then definitely we will become competitive as a country. But if we don't address it, we can't compete with our counterpart. And remember, we've opened up our markets through AFCFTA, so goods can come all the way from Egypt, from Zambia, and access the Kenyan market. So our competitiveness needs to be really reviewed in terms of power, in terms of levies, in terms of other taxes. If we don't look at it broadly like that, then we will remain a trading nation rather than a manufacturing nation.
I see. And you mentioned solar, and I remembered, I think there's a proposal to standard rate some solar equipment in the Finance Bill 25.
Yeah, so thanks, Julian. So just picking up from where Tobias has left, as a country, we pride ourselves to have more than 90% of renewable energy, and we want to fully transition to renewable energy in the coming years. But what the Finance Bill 2025 is providing for, in light of that rationalization that we were talking about earlier on, is to say for geothermal, which is renewable energy, solar and wind, when you are doing a geothermal exploration or when you're constructing a solar or a wind power, currently you are entitled to VAT exemption. And the rationale for that exemption is because the upfront cost is so significant. If I'm to give you an example with geothermal, drilling one well is about $6.5 million. So that's why you need to cushion the investors, because you might drill that well and it's a dry well. It doesn't have steam. So it means that it's very risky. Thinking about a power plant, it is a very high amount that is required to construct this power plant. So you're trying to cushion the investors by exempting them from this VAT. If we don't do that, what will eventually happen if the Finance Bill proposal passes and we now say that these products are going to attract VAT at 16%, it means that this cost will inevitably be passed on to the consumers. Because what will happen is, if I am a developer, I have incurred this 16%, I have borrowed. I have to factor in that in my costs. Yes, I'm going to be able to claim this input VAT or this VAT I'm paying upfront against my future sales. But it's going to take a long period of time. So for that period of time, I need to be compensated for that working capital facility. And that is how now this is going to translate to higher tariffs. So I think this is something that needs to be looked at to make sure that the infrastructure projects, the power sector, are shielded when it comes to incentives.
I see. And I'm sure many of us might have missed that point in Finance Bill 25. I can see a lot of questions coming in around the provision around trade secrets in Finance Bill. Let's listen to this clip. Jackie, if we could play that clip on trade secrets and personal data, and then we shall now react to that point. Oh, I'm told, okay, so fine, we shall have it in a bit, but maybe as we preempt it, Fred, what are your thoughts on this provision?
So that's a heavy one.
Even adjusting how you're sitting.
Exactly. So it was introduced, and I think it was introduced in December 2024 under the Tax Laws Amendment Act, under Section 59. That's when it tried to tighten. And I think it's good to ask ourselves where this one is coming from. Because I think this journey started when there was the intent by the government to integrate the systems of the Revenue Authority with the systems of the taxpayers. And according to them then, the idea was then to ensure that taxes are paid promptly, and I think you have seen that one in the betting sector, where taxes are actually limited within 24 hours.
Correct.
But I think what happened is that there was, so the fact that there was a bit of, there's this integration, then the Revenue Authority then is able to access a lot of data that is even, personal in nature. And that is why then parliamentarians moved with a bit of speed in December 2024 to remit that. because obviously we also have our data privacy laws. And you don't know how that data will actually be used by the people who do correct it. So for me, it's one of those proposals that we have strongly requested the finance committee to actually drop it as they take the bill to the next stage, and we hope it will actually be dropped, because you can imagine what would happen if trade secrets of your company are given to someone else.
Yeah.
It is definitely not very good for business, and we hope that it is one of those proposals that will actually be deleted from the current bill.
Before we hear from Edna and Tobias, let's listen to that clip where the Director General National Treasury was commenting, because I challenged him on this matter at the Budget Summit last week.
We as Treasury, we do not agree that the integration of KRA system will get or put secret information into the bad people, the people who should not access that information. As it is today, as it was before the amendment was done in Parliament. Remember that amendment was introduced in Parliament that changed the law to bar KRA, to limit the ability of KRA to access data online by limiting, introducing words there like secret and something. So we as Treasury, and we have also checked the teams that have been working on this have also checked, and we believe it will not offend the Data Protection Act, but we can have this conversation, and it's on the basis of that submission was done to Parliament.
FCP Edna Gitashu, it will not offend provisions and constraints of the Data Protection Act.
So, Gillian, I think I want to take a different angle to this whole debate. And we ask ourselves, the national tax policy provides that once a law is introduced, it should be in place for at least 5 years. Now, these are 4 months.
4 months.
4 months from December. Yes. We've not fully tested this provision. We don't know what the concerns are because it's not fully tested. Let's give it time, because it's going to go a long way in making sure we have a predictable tax environment. We should not be changing things 4 months down the line. And it's not the only one that has been changed.
But remember, that's why the DG was saying, this is a provision that we just saw emerge in Parliament. It was not from the National Treasury.
But Parliament is the one that is supposed to be making laws.
It's the legislative arm.
And there was extensive public participation last year on the same provision. Taxpayers were very concerned about sharing personal information and trade secrets. So what they said is, Revenue Authority, come and integrate with our financial systems. Whatever data you want, you can pull from our financial statements, but leave our trade secrets alone and personal information. It's only 4 months, Julian. Let's see how it goes.
Good point. Tobias, as an umbrella body for businesses, how do you view this proposal?
Just from the word trade secrets already shows you that we are agitated by this proposal, and we do not support it because businesses are competing in the market, and as it is, we cannot trust that our information in terms of how we do business will be secure with KRA. Someone else may access it to his benefit and to detriment of the competitor or others. So we are not comfortable with the proposal just the way it is, as simple as that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rashid, there's a question here coming online, and this gentleman is asking, can Kenya comfortably finance universal healthcare coverage? And we had this conversation at Serena, and he's asking, given the constraints and the large informal sector, can we find alternative solutions?
I think if you look at the budget, the way it is constructed, 71 to 72% of our budget is spent on recurrent expenditure. What are recurrent expenditure? Salaries, pension, debt servicing. Yeah. And only 29% of the budget is spent on the development expenditure. And that is too little. If we want to grow our manufacturing, if we want to grow our exports, if we want to grow our healthcare, then we really need to control our recurrent expenditures and spend more money on the development expenditure. If you look at the size of the government and the expenditure on the government side, I think that needs to be reduced. Once we reduce that recurrent expenditure, then we will have enough money, I think, then we can then take it towards the development expenditure like education, like healthcare, like infrastructure. I think we can definitely. There are countries, I mean, if you look at South Africa, for example, South Africa spends 11% of its budget on healthcare.
Yeah.
And they are doing very well on healthcare space. If you look at Turkey, Turkey spends 10.3% of its budget on healthcare, and they are doing very well. So to answer your question, the question, the first answer that I gave, the question is, where do we want to be as a country?
Yeah.
Do we want to continue to send our people outside to get healthcare? Do we continue to be in issues of lack of specialists in the country? If you look at the specialist divide between the urban and rural areas, are we happy with the status quo? Then we don't need to change anything. But if we are not happy, then something needs to change. And what is something needs to change? We need to control our recurrent expenditure and spend on development expenditure. So that's one part. Then we have to look at other development partners as well. There are many development partners, and we can do project-based financing for that. So for example, if you look at the Kenya demographic survey of last year, 4 in 10 deaths are happening because of the non-communicable diseases. Africa and Kenya, a few years back, was known for infectious disease, TB, HIV, yes, and likes. Now the disease burden of non-communicable disease is increasing, and it will continue to increase. The lifestyle disease, as it's called, for hypertension, diabetes, cancers. So if we can do project-based financing for some of these diseases as well, that's number 2. And number 3, I think the public sector institutions and the private sector institutions, they can join hands, and we did that, and we did that very well during COVID. And it's not distinct memory. We succeeded. I think we as a country did remarkably well as a country to control that. So I think there is value, and we can find synergies between the public and the private sector as well. I want to say one thing which is very close to my heart, and we were discussing earlier as well. I think when we talk about physicians, I think we need more specialists in the country.
Yeah.
That means we need to train more specialists in the country. I have said this many, many times, and I will continue to say it many, many times. People say doctors, it's kind of a misnomer. I think doctors can be divided in 3 different levels. I think we have a lot of first degree doctors. I think we are doing well there, and we should continue to spend that. But also we need to train more subspecialists as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm told we have about 14 minutes to go, so let me start here. Fred,
Yep.
You've read the finance bill. What are your 2 top priority areas that you think should be addressed?
2 top priority areas, maybe very, very broadly, and I think is what has come out from this conversation.
Yeah.
I think there is a missed opportunity when you look at the finance bill as far as, paying fidelity to our policy documents that we have put out there. Talking about the national tax policy, that's very clear in terms of how we want to see our tax, framework. And I think we had it made public sometimes in April 2023, and as if that was not enough, to make us happy, we even went ahead to give us an MTRS, the medium-term revenue strategy,
matrix.
a very good implementation matrix, very, very specific in terms of what we want to do.
Yeah.
And if you look at the implementation matrix, actually, it's very, very clear. It talks about the dates. If you look at things like the VAT rate, I think it was supposed to have been dropped. It ought to have gone down by 1% last year. Corporate income tax rate ought to have gone down to 28% this year.
Yeah.
Pay buds ought to have been reviewed to some extent. And a number of many other things in there, and a lot of incoherence as far as policy is concerned. We're talking about renewable energy. Besides VAT, renewable energy is also going to be affected by other provisions that are in the bill, such as the capping of the tax losses. Those are sectors that are heavy on capital, so at some point they end up then accumulating a lot of tax losses. Now there's a proposal to cap the period of time to 5 years, which is somewhere that you are actually before. Speaking again to our policy as a country, because you can't change this one to 4 years today. After 3 years, you change it back to 5 years. There was a time it was 10 years. There was a time it was indefinite. Like right now, it is indefinite. So those inconsistencies are not very good for businesses.
Okay.
And we actually need to pay fidelity to those documents. And we hope, even if we don't take everything that is in the matrix of the implementation matrix of MTRS, at least we are going to see, Parliament stamping their authority in terms of saying, look, we have a document here. And by the way, we spent a lot of time doing public participation on those documents. So it is only good that they are also, taken into account as we go along.
Okay.
So I would probably put it that way, in a very broad perspective. But obviously, these are the things that you're talking about, like pay to play. Those are things that we hope will not be there. Data privacy, as well, and also the issue of the tax losses being capped. We hope that capping can be dropped, and even if it is not dropped, then maybe the cabinet secretary is empowered to probably extend that particular period of time on a case-by-case basis.
All right.
Yeah.
Edna.
Yeah, let me just pick it up from where Fred has left it on the tax losses. So 2009, we had 5 years carry forward of tax losses. 2016, we realized that the 5 years were not working. We went to 10 years. And in these two provisions, 2009 and 2016, there was room for the cabinet secretary in charge of finance to extend the carry forward period. So then I think bare minimum, if we must have this provision, we have to go back to 10 years, where we left it, with a provision for the CS National Treasury to be able to extend beyond the 10 years. And mainly because of infrastructure investments in the country. If we don't do this, it means that as an investor, your internal rate of return is reduced significantly. Then the question would be, do you want to come and invest in the country? But to your question, I think the larger thing for me is around predictability. Those provisions that were introduced in December, 27th of December last year, let's drop them. So one of them is around objections, filing of objections and tax appeals. This is to do with dispute resolution. Taxpayers were given more time because in the computation of their 30 days, we were then allowed to exclude weekends and public holidays. 4 months down the line,
we are changing it.
So I think we need to look at this and say, no, let's agree. Anything that was introduced in December, let's not touch it. Another that was introduced in December, if you're investing outside of Nairobi and Mombasa, you are entitled to 150% so long as you incurred expenditure of 1 billion.
Correct.
So the threshold was changed in December from 2 billion to 1 billion. So at least let's give it some time.
Already
we test this provision. Now we are repealing it completely. So predictability for me is very key. And just to reiterate a point that Fred made around the rates and the implementation of the medium-term revenue strategy. It's a 3-year plan. So we are halfway. Some of the proposals are yet to be implemented. One that I think we should look at very hastily is the rates, and especially the corporate income tax rates. If you look at the global average corporate income tax rate, it's about 23%. African average is about 27%. So we are above the average. And we've seen other African countries like South Africa, Nigeria, and Rwanda, and Mauritius consciously making an effort to reduce these rates. So let's look at these rates. And as we reduce these rates, we make ourselves competitive. We are going to attract more investment into the country. And this is one way of expanding the tax base. Because, Julian's expansion of the tax base is not just rationalization of expenditure. It is also putting measures to stimulate economic growth so that you can have more investments in the country.
Tobias.
For me, just 3 things. One is the adherence to the national tax policy. These annual changes are not good for investment. We need to be assured that we are not going to see any more changes probably until the next 4 or 5 years to create predictability in terms of the investment. Number 2, since I represent the manufacturing sector, taxation of our inputs really need to be sorted out. So we have excise coming out in and out. We have changing from 0 rate to exempt in and out. And we need to address this issue of VAT administration permanently so that we are sorted out. My final point is an issue that is going to be a time bomb in terms of that are affecting probably what we call the beer manufacturer, excise on beer manufacturers particularly, and cigarettes. This is a sector that we want to tax to its death. And the more we tax it, the more we encourage illicit. Illicit and counterfeit is huge. If you look at globally, the illicit and counterfeit economy can fund the African economy and keep change. It is huge. If we underestimate it, we've seen the growth of illicit trade by about 11%. The government is losing about 120 billion because of illicit trade. So the more you tax this sector, the more illicit we'll get in this country.
So we need to choose our poison.
Correct.
Now that we have all given our closing thoughts, let me give Rashid a chance to give his closing thought.
It will be around healthcare. So, and it will be around SHA. I think when SHA, we were told that it has 3 funds. It has primary fund, SHIF,
yes,
and the emergency and the chronic fund. Easiest thing was 2.75, tax the employed sector, done, dusted, right? What about the primary and the chronic and the emergency fund, which was to fund, which was to come from the government, right? If you look at primary healthcare in our country, I think we are really struggling, right? There are efforts in going on, but I think the primary fund and the emergency and the chronic fund, we still have to find the funding sources for it, and I think that's still not there. Yeah. If we want a healthy population, then we have to invest in primary care. And there will always be emergency and the chronic cases in the country. I mean, people going for cancer treatments, for example, or road traffic accidents, for example, or people needing 3 dialysis in a week rather than 2 dialysis in a week. So those require funding as well. So I think I'm not sure if the funding for the primary and the emergency and the chronic has been found.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the close of our conversation tonight, where we have been focusing on a raft of issues, whether it is Finance Bill 25 or budget estimates at a sectoral focus, predominantly on manufacturing and the healthcare sector. We have discussed issues of healthcare financing, especially with the UHC coming into focus, that is the universal health coverage. Today happened to be the last day for submission of comments to the Clerk of the National Assembly around Finance Bill 25. That is from the public, because the hearings still continue. Even tomorrow and the day after, they shall be taking place. I hope you submitted your comments. I did submit mine. We now wait to see what will be in the report coming from the committee. We shall continue highlighting these issues, because June 12th, we shall have the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary presenting the budget statement before the National Assembly, and that tends to be a major highlight for the budget cycle, because that kicks us now to the last leg, which takes us to the appropriation bill, which once it is passed, then we start the financial year on the 1st of July 2025. So this is just part of it. Stay tuned to NTV. We shall be giving the lowdown as and when it unfolds. Thank you for being part of this. Let's meet again next week on Tuesday for Business Redefined.